started my career, I was an associate at a large international law firm. And for those of you who aren't familiar with big law firm life, suffice it to say that it can be pretty intense. The hours, if nothing else, are very, very long. Work starts at whatever time in the morning. You're routinely in the office until midnight or later, and certainly working almost every single weekend. But obviously, I had the benefit of having Shabbos and not having to work on Shabbos. And for the most part, people were pretty respectful of the fact that I was not available on Saturdays. They may not necessarily have loved it, but nobody ever said anything. You know, and at the beginning, having Shabbos was really something that was fantastic because it meant that I had that time to recharge my physical and spiritual batteries. And at the beginning, it really wasn't more in terms of work than making sure that the taxi desk that my firm had to order cars for attorneys when they had to travel for work, that they had an actual schedule of when Shabbos ended every single week. So there was a car waiting for me as soon as Shabbos was over to take me back to the office. Now, over time, though, it started to get a little more intense and work started encroaching more and more on my non-work time, a little of it that I had. In fact, I remember one time sitting at my Shabbos table during Shalosh Shudas, during the third meal, and the phone rings. And this is back in the days of regular answering machines. And we're sitting there, and there's somebody leaving a message on the machine, one of the senior associates I was working with, asking me, making sure that I was coming into the office that night. So here I was on Shabbos, and I couldn't get work sort of out of my mind because it was sort of encroaching on my time. And it really came to a head in some respect when one year, I'll never forget this, I'm sitting in shul on Yom Kippur during Ne'ilah. It's the holiest time of the holiest day of the year. All we're supposed to be doing is davening. And all I can do is think about the fact that I had to go to the office that night. And I was worried that what was going to be waiting for me on my desk when I got there. And would I have time to even stop and eat something when I got back home before I had to get into the car? And as I'm in the car on the way to the office, it's just like, I'm thinking to myself, I can't keep doing this. There's no way that I can continue balancing these two different competing interests. My life, my religion, my relationship with Hashem, my relationship with my family, I know that that is the most important thing. But on the other hand, my career is important to me too, and I know that I have to work to feed my family if nothing else, and yet work just seemed to encroach on my life. And I knew there was no way I was going to be able to keep doing this because it was just going to get worse and worse. I had to figure out some way to actually make everything work together. As it happens, I'm not the first person to really ever grapple with this issue. The Jewish people, when they were in the desert, they spent 40 years pretty much living in a bubble. They had the clouds of glory surrounding them, and all of their needs were taken care of by Hashem. They had the manna falling from heaven, they had a well that supplied them with water, their clothes would grow with them. Their physical needs were 100% taken care of. They didn't need to lift a finger. All they did, and they needed to do, was focus on their spirituality, focus on their relationship with Hashem. And when those 40 years ended, and they're on the border of the land of Israel, Moshe spent the last 35 days of his life. He knew he wasn't going to be joining them when they began the conquest of the land of Israel. And he spent those last 35 days preparing them, giving them a pep talk. You spent all this time in the desert, and now you're leaving the bubble, and you're going to work. And there's a lot to be learned from the words that Moshe uses, from the messages that Moshe tries to impart to the Jewish people, in thinking about how we as Jews are supposed to approach what it means to be out in the workplace, and how to fuse those things together. One of the themes that comes up throughout Sefer Devarim is the idea of Devekas, which literally means to cling. The idea of clinging to Hashem. Now, to say that we're going to cling to Hashem, we can use that word somewhat colloquially and say that it means to be close to Hashem. But it's always important when we're reading through the Torah that we look at the specific language that's used, because the words themselves can tell us something very, very important and give us a much more nuanced message than we might otherwise think. So all the commentators grapple with what exactly it is that Moshe is referring to when he says we should be davek, to cling to Hashem. We're physical beings. How can we actually cling to Hashem? So the Ramban, Nachmanides, explains that really what Moshe is referring to here is to have Hashem on your mind all the time, to making sure that you're really always thinking about Hashem. I don't know about you, I have a difficult time thinking about the same thing for more than an hour. I don't know how Moshe would actually expect us to think about Hashem 24 hours a day. But how are we supposed to approach that? Maybe for a great tzaddik, a big rabbi, they could think about Hashem all the time. But all the mitzvahs in the Torah are for everyone. It's for every single Jew to be able to accomplish that. So how are we supposed to think about what it means to be thinking about Hashem all the time? So one of the things that Moshe actually said, and this goes back to last week's Parsha, and for those of you who subscribe to my WhatsApp chat, I talked about this a little bit last week. Moshe said, V'haya ekev tishma'un. Now those words translated mean, and it will be because you will listen to the Torah and follow Hashem, that Hashem will keep his covenant with the Jewish people. But the word ekev is kind of, again, a strange word, because it comes from the root meaning heel, like the heel of your foot. So what does Moshe mean? He says that it will be because, ekev, referring to your heel, that you will listen to the Torah. So the Sivas Shalom, the Rebbe from Slonim, explains the following. A person has 3 parts to his physical body that actually relate to 3 different parts of his spirituality. So for example, you have a person's head, which is his brain relates to the way he thinks, his philosophy, his personality. You have your heart, which is a person's real strong needs and wants and desires, but not just physical. It means what you want out of life. And then you have your limbs. And the limbs refer to your physical desires, your basic physical needs. The word ekev, again, meaning heel, what Moshe was telling the Jewish people is that if you will keep the Torah all the way through your heel, through your most basic physical desires, that's the way that you will be able to actually cling to Hashem. Meaning we don't split up our spirituality and our physical existence. We try to fuse them together. We don't check our spirituality at the door when we leave shul. We take it with us. It's similar, when again, going back to my first firm, that they told us that you always remember that you are an associate at Weil Gotshal. And when you're out in the streets, keep in mind that you're representing the firm, even if you're not necessarily involved in something that's work-related. But at that time, you're representative of the firm. And so you have to carry yourself a certain way, even when you're doing things that don't necessarily involve firm business. With Torah, it's the same thing. We need to bring Torah into every aspect of our lives. And we don't just think about splitting it into, okay, so when I'm serving Hashem and I'm davening or I'm learning Torah, so that's spirituality. But when I'm out at work, and the two things don't necessarily have anything to do with each other. That's the wrong way to think about it. Being at work and being not directly involved in spirituality doesn't mean you can't infuse the spiritual into the physical. Now, it's a mistake to think that that just means that we should always be in our best behavior. It's one way to think about it is, you represent your firm wherever you are and just make sure you don't do anything that's going to land the firm on the front page of the New York Times. It's actually much, much deeper than that. There's something interesting again about the Hebrew language. All the words that we use that describe spiritual endeavors, Torah, mitzvah, avoda, which means spiritual work, kedusha, holiness, all of those words have a vav and a hey in the middle. But when it comes to words that actually relate to physical things that we do, achila, eating, shtia, drinking, lina, sleeping, halicha, walking, all those words have a yud and a hey. Now, yud and hey together is Hashem's name. That seems a little bit ironic. Words that relate to spirituality, no mention of Hashem whatsoever. Words that relate to purely physical actions have Hashem baked right into the middle. You'd think it would actually be the opposite. So then the Sivas Shalom explains, it's easy to have spirituality in spiritual actions, of course. Our goal, our job, is to take basic physical things that we do and infuse them with spirituality. I mean, not to look at eating as just, I'm eating because I enjoy it. But I'm eating because Hashem wants me to enjoy the planet that He created. I'm eating because I want to have strength in order that I can do the things that I need to do. To make a bracha before I eat something and to thank Hashem. Meaning to take something that on the surface is just a mundane action, it really doesn't seem to have any spirituality in it whatsoever, and making it into a spiritual action. What Moshe was telling the Jewish people was, look, you've been in this bubble for the last 40 years. All you've done is have to focus on the spiritual. You didn't need to worry about the physical at all. Hashem took care of everything directly. You didn't have a care in the world except to work on becoming greater spiritual beings. But that time's up. You're leaving the bubble and you're going out into the real world. And Hashem's not going to be with you the way that he's been up until now. You're going to have to do it on your own. He wanted to make sure that they took that spiritual training that they had, that intense spiritual boot camp, if you will, over the last 40 years, and didn't forget about it, and didn't just leave it behind, but they used that as the focus of everything that was they were going to be doing, even when they were only focusing on, war and trying to conquer the land and setting up communities and planting and harvesting. All these things require a spiritual element to them as well. You can infuse the spirituality even into the basic physical things that it is that you're doing. Now, of course, this is easier said than done, but there's a flip side to it. In a lot of ways, it's not a big deal to serve Hashem and to try to become close to Hashem when all you're doing is spiritual stuff. Right? It bothered me so much that I was thinking about work on Yom Kippur because I knew that it's Yom Kippur. And Yom Kippur is really supposed to be about serving Hashem. And so if you're able to focus, that's not necessarily all that big a deal in order to use the spirituality. You're tapping into it. That's exactly what you're doing. But to bring Hashem into our regular lives, to be doing basic everyday stuff, you're commuting to work, you're in the office, you're in a meeting, and to bring Hashem in there with you, so you're focusing on Hashem as part of your everyday life, that's a big deal. That's not so easy to do. Hashem doesn't get tremendous nachas or pride from the fact that angels do what they're supposed to do. The fact that angels are serving him. Of course they are. They're angels. They don't know how to do anything else. But for a human being who has regular physical desires, to sort of take and overcome them and to use and bring the spiritual into the physical, that's huge. I'm not sure you could put into words how much nachas Hashem gets when he sees a Jew sitting at his desk and he takes out and he gets a cup of coffee. And he doesn't just mumble a blessing or bracha. He stops and he thinks. And he thanks Hashem for this cup of coffee. And he's thinking about the fact that he can have spirituality in his life. You know how awesome Hashem thinks that is? How amazing it is that a Jew can do that in his regular life, to focus on the spiritual when he's involved in regular physical activities? This is something that we have the opportunity to do every single day of the week during work. But the truth is, it's actually much, much deeper than that. There's this American view of work that it's something almost sometimes can be viewed as a necessary evil. We work so we can get to the point where we can retire. But even if you really enjoy what it is that you do, people often look and they think about the future when they're not going to have to work anymore and they're just going to be able to lie on a beach or spend more time with their family or focus on their other interests. When I was sitting in Shul on Yom Kippur, and it bothered me that instead of davening, I was thinking about work and I wasn't concentrating, that bothered me simply because I knew that davening at that time was much more important. That focusing on Hashem was what I was supposed to be doing, and I wasn't supposed to be focusing on work. It never bothered me when I was sitting at my desk thinking about what my upcoming Shabbos was going to be like, or thinking about the upcoming holiday, or even thinking about an interesting Torah thought that somebody had taught me. And the reason it never bothered me was because I knew that really that was more important. Things in our lives, like our relationship with Hashem, like our families, we know these things are more important than work. And so we often view work as a little bit of a necessary evil. But the reality is that for the overwhelming majority of us, we're going to spend most of our lives working. That's not an accident. It's not just coincidental that Hashem set things up that way, that we need to work in order to support our families. In fact, I'll tell you something interesting. There's a blessing, a bracha that we make after we eat certain foods, the blessing of Borei Nefashot. And the words of Borei Nefashot are, bless you Hashem, Borei Nefashot Rabot V'Chesronan, who created many different souls and the things that they're lacking. The things that we're lacking are not just it happens to be we need something. Hashem specifically created the things that we're lacking as needs for us. these things are not just random. I'm a human being and I happen to have needs for stuff. Hashem created the needs the same way that He created me. And so working, this is not just something that we have to do. Hashem set this up. He wants us to be working. Supporting our families, going to our job every day, that itself is serving Hashem. It may not be the same direct serving of Hashem that's obvious to us, like sitting in shul and davening or learning Torah, but it's what Hashem wants us to be doing at that moment in time. It's something that Hashem created and built into the fabric of the world. He doesn't want us to split our lives into two different parts, my family, my religion, and work. These are all one thing, all one part of our life that we should view as one whole. Sometimes we're serving Hashem in a direct way, where it's obvious, and sometimes we're doing things that are not as obvious, but equally as important. You ask anybody who's in sales, for example. There's closing the sale, where you're obviously about to get paid, and then there's the spade work that you do with the clients, where you work them over and you talk to them until you actually build the relationship. And when you're doing that initial work, you're not seeing any actual results. And it may take some time, and who knows if you'll ever see results. But it doesn't make it any less important. In fact, we know we have to do that kind of work. These are the things that actually enable us to have success when it comes to actually closing the deal. So it's so important to recognize that when we go to work, it's not just about something that we have to do, that I'd rather be doing something else. That's where Hashem wants us. And because it's where Hashem wants us, it's every bit as important and every bit as spiritual as the things that are obviously spiritual. It's kind of funny. One of the things I've been reading about that as a result of people working from home from COVID is that spouses are recognizing that their husband or their wife may have a little bit of a different personality at work than they do at home. And I forget where I was reading this. Somebody was saying how, everyone, as an example, this woman was writing that, everyone knows and hates that guy who, when a meeting's starting to wrap up, they raise a new issue or try to circle back to something that had already been decided. Everyone starts to groan. And this woman was writing, I'm listening to my husband on a conference call, and I'm realizing that my husband is that guy. And because his personality at work was different than his personality at home. But that really just sort of is feeding into this idea that work and home are two different things, and I'm maybe a different kind of person, one that I am at the other. It's all the same. It should all be focused on recognizing that Hashem has a plan for us, and Hashem has things that He wants us to do, and that work doesn't have to be any less a spiritual experience than sitting in shul. Now again, this is something that is definitely easier to say than it is to do. And I think that part of figuring out and changing that mindset requires, I think, recognizing and understanding how exactly our livelihoods work. So we, I think, generally have a view, this is the way the world views it, that we work, we get paid. We put in more effort, we get paid more. We put in less effort, we get paid less. But the rabbis teach us that every year on Rosh Hashanah, Hashem decides how much money we're going to be making, what our livelihood is going to be for that year. So all the work and the effort that we put in, number one, doesn't really decide how much money we're going to be making. But number two, all of our success comes from Hashem. Right? Moshe tells the Jewish people in Sefer Devarim that one of the biggest mistakes we can make, and this may be one of the reasons why Hashem created the world this way, is Hashem is sort of giving us the opportunity to grow by saying, we think, Kochi ve'otzem yadi, asa li yasachayil hazeh. It's my work. I did this. I leave Hashem out of it. I'm the one who took care of this. And that's a mistake. We have to recognize that all our success in life, everything comes from Hashem. It's sort of like the guy's looking for parking on a busy Brooklyn street, and he realizes that he's just not going to find a space. And he says, Hashem, please, I hope you can help me find a space. Oh, wait, never mind, I found one over here. Right? We think that the effort of things that we do the success we have is from us. When the reality is we have to recognize that everything comes from Hashem. Now, when you start to realize that, you start to look at life a little bit differently. Because you'll actually start to notice things that happen in your career and in your life generally that you don't even realize, or you start to realize, like, hey, I can't believe Hashem set this up for me the right way. So, give you one example. I was working as an associate, and in the bankruptcy courts where I practice, so judges always prefer that the parties manage to work things out themselves. The judges don't like to have trials if they can avoid it, and part of being a good bankruptcy practitioner means cutting deals. So I'm in court one Monday morning for a hearing, and there was another hearing that was going on before me, and one of the associates from this other law firm who was handling this hearing says to the judge, "Your Honor, I know we had a trial scheduled for today, but I'm happy to report that the parties have come to a settlement, and I want to describe the settlement to Your Honor." And the judge stops and says, "Counsel, are you an associate or a partner?" And the guy says, "I'm an associate." He says, "Okay, have you read my chamber rules?" The associate says, "No." The judge says, "When did you cut this deal?" The associate says, "It was Sunday morning." And did it ever occur to you, counselor, that perhaps I was in my office all day yesterday preparing for a contested trial? And the associate's like, kind of like at a loss for words. It's like, my chamber rules say that if you cut a deal over the weekend, you're supposed to call chambers and leave a message and let me know. I ruined my Sunday yesterday because you didn't let me know that you had cut a deal and there wouldn't be a trial today. And I'm sitting there like, oh my gosh, I never would have considered that. And it happened to me like a month later in front of the same judge that we were starting to get something close over the weekend, and I made sure to tell the other people working on it, we have to call the judge's chambers if we're getting a deal done and we think the trial's not going to happen on Monday morning. There's something where I had a success in my career. Success, I mean I avoided a major embarrassment. And only because I happened to be sitting in court seeing this happen to somebody else. When Hashem set things up for me to enable me to succeed in a certain instance, and it was all because just Hashem wanted, for whatever reason, for me that I should succeed at that point. And if we pay attention and we look out for these sorts of things, we'll see that it happens all the time. Sometimes when things are going tough for us, they're difficult, it's easy for us to daven to Hashem. But one of the challenges of life, and one of the different areas where we can focus on and improve ourselves at work, is when things are going well, not forgetting that everything comes from Hashem, and that our successes are from Hashem, and we need to thank Him and daven even when things are going well, recognizing where all our successes come from. Now, of course, this may lead you to a little bit of a question. If my success and my livelihood is all being decided by Hashem in advance, then maybe I don't even need to bother. Why put in any effort at all? Hashem will just make sure that it works out for me. Sort of like the story of a guy who's riding his bike along a cliff, and he falls over, and he manages to grab a tree branch, and so he doesn't fall down 100 feet. And he's hanging there and he's davening, praying, Hashem, please save me. And a helicopter comes along, and it can't really get so close, but they try to lower a ladder, and he can't really quite reach it. And he's like, no, you know what? Don't worry about it. Someone else will save me. Helicopter flies off, and ultimately the guy falls and he dies. And he makes his way up to heaven, and he looks at Hashem, and he looks at the ministering angel, and he says, I don't understand. Why didn't God save me? And God looks at him and says, what do you mean? I sent you a helicopter. You chose not to put in the effort to try to grab it. In our lives, it's all about the effort. Hashem wants us to work for it. He doesn't want to just give it to us. Yeah, the success ultimately comes from Hashem, but the effort that we put in, that's all us. And in order to grow, we have to work at it to improve. We can't just come into this world and kind of coast through life. You're never going to get anywhere. It's all about improving the way we are. Imagine you have two different guys. First guy's, call him Brad. And he's good looking, he's smart, he's even-tempered, he's got a good work ethic, just a generally good guy. And he's very successful because everyone likes hanging around with him. He's very smart, he does a good job, and he goes through life really just killing it. Right? He becomes very wealthy, he gives a lot of charity, does good things in his community, everyone likes hanging around with him. From our perspective, life is fantastic. And then you have a second guy, call him Jim. And Jim is, he's kind of an irritable guy. He's not very good looking. He's not that bright. And he goes through life kind of not really getting anywhere. He's kind of stuck in a dead-end job, and his home life is not great either. He fights with his wife, and his kids don't really respect him. But, he tries a little bit. He buys a self-help book, and he puts in some effort, and maybe improves a little bit, but he doesn't really get much. And from the outside, Jim's life doesn't look all that great. And so Brad and Jim, after their lives end, they make their way up to that great court case in the sky, and they're standing in front, and they're looking at everything that's going on. And God looks at Brad, and Brad's like, look, my life's great, and I did everything. And God says, you did a great job. Things were good, you did fantastic. And Jim says, wait a second. Look what you gave him. My life wasn't so good, but what did I have? I started with, you gave me nothing. And God says, yeah, you're right. Brad, you did a good job. I'm not going to take that away from you. But you're basically the guy who was born on third base and thinks he hit a triple. Jim, your life, I gave you very, very little to work with. And you put in the effort. Did you succeed? Maybe yes, maybe not. But you improved the thing that I gave you. I gave you a soul. And you took that and you made it better, even if it's just a little bit. But you put in the effort to make it better. Yeah, I'm not going to take away from Brad's accomplishments. But at the end of the day, he was given such tremendous tools to work with. Hashem's actually going to expect more of him. See, from Hashem's perspective, he gives us the tools. The question is, what do we do with them? Some people have greater tools than others. But if we don't put in the effort and work at improving ourselves, we're not giving Hashem back the thing that he gave us that's better than he gave it to us. Everything in our lives is about doing the work. It's about trying to work at improving ourselves. And whether it's obviously spiritual stuff, like we're sitting in shul, or being at work and recognizing that Hashem wants us to be there and trying to be the best person that we can and trying to focus on making sure there's spirituality in our lives and trying to make sure that we act like a mensch. That's what Hashem wants from us. Hashem wants us to put in the work and improve ourselves and make ourselves into better people. Now, of course, as you're listening to this, it may actually start to sound a bit scary. You think, oh, guess what? You're going to have to work the rest of your life. And part of the reason we think that is because we're just not used to the concept. We have to recognize that work isn't just about work. It's about doing everything we can to have that deep spiritual connection with Hashem. It's what can actually help us get the most fulfillment out of our lives, is doing that work in order to enable us to come closer to Hashem. But there's another part of it too. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs points out something really, really interesting. In Sefer Devarim, as Moshe is giving, again, this pep talk, how does he get the Jewish people prepared? What does he tell them? Well, what he does for the most part is he reviews all the mitzvot in the Torah. Now, you would think that from the Jewish people's perspective, they may feel like, okay, enough. We know what the mitzvot are already. You're not necessarily going to get us excited and get us ready to go by just reviewing, do this, don't do that, do this, don't do that. But Rabbi Sachs points out something really, really interesting. In the entirety of the first 4 books of the Torah, the word simcha, happiness, is used 4 times, 1 in each of the first 4 books. In Devarim, in the entire Sefer Devarim, Moshe uses the word 12 times. Moshe's message to the Jewish people is that finding true happiness, not just meaning, but happiness, is by keeping the mitzvot, by doing the work. Nobody ever became happiness and felt fulfilled, and certainly long-term happiness, by sitting on a beach doing nothing all day. It's nice to go on vacation and recharge, but to do nothing, to not do anything meaningful, nobody finds happiness in that. Somebody who happens to win the lottery or have some massive inheritance so they could just sit back and do nothing, we all know there's no happiness there. Yeah, maybe you think on a day-to-day level it'll be a little bit easier, but you're not going to find any happiness in that. The path to happiness, the way that Hashem set up the world, is that by doing this work, by actively trying to make ourselves better, to bring ourselves closer to Hashem, that's where happiness comes from. And if you want to find that meaning, it's in recognizing that everything that we do gives us that opportunity to bring us closer to Hashem. When you have this perspective, it can completely change what your life is like. On a day-to-day basis, what we think of as like the drudgery of going to work, the commute, and if you're in New York, certainly pre-COVID, being on a packed subway or sitting in traffic, or dealing with difficult people, all of these things are not just a byproduct or related issue of us going to work. All of that is part of the opportunity that Hashem gives us in our regular day to become closer to Him, to improve ourselves, to make ourselves into better people. So now you can start viewing these mundane actions, this day-to-day life, being part of the rat race, as a deeply spiritual experience. It doesn't have to be something that's separate from the rest of your life. There is no rest of your life. It's all the same. Whether you're in shul or whether you're at work, it's about serving Hashem and about making yourself into a better person. And when you have those difficult things that come up, you don't view it as a difficulty that you wish you didn't have to deal with. It's an opportunity. It's an opportunity that Hashem is giving you to make yourself better, to overcome that challenge and to grow. A number of years ago, I read this story that somehow just stuck with me about a guy named Clayton Prince. He was a soap opera actor, probably never even heard of him, and he actually at the same time trained to be in the Guardian Angels. Back then, this is I think in the sort of the late 80s, was when the Guardian Angels was really becoming a big name. And this guy tells over a story about how he was an actor, he was making a nice living, he didn't have a need to join the Guardian Angels and put himself in danger, but he felt the need to give back. And what he did was, he said this crazy story where he's basically on the subway and a guy pulls a knife and is threatening to stab him. And Clayton Prince tells over the story where in his mind he says, I had just taken a month of intense martial arts training, including just having learned how to disarm somebody with a knife. And the only thing I could think when this guy pulled a knife on me was, pop quiz, I'm ready. A terrible challenge, things that could be very difficult to deal with, and you view it as an opportunity. And this is especially true when it comes to dealing with a difficult boss. Again, one of the things about being a lawyer in a big firm is partners at a big firm have a reputation as being difficult and very, very demanding. And certainly when I was a young associate, I saw examples of this all the time. Well, one story that really stuck with me is one day we were preparing for a trial, for a big hearing. And a bunch of us were in the office till very, very late. We got in there very, very early, and we're getting prepared to get all our files together to go downtown to the bankruptcy court. And it's, sort of imagine a lot of hustle and bustle and people kind of running around. And one of the paralegals, this guy named Dan, had a few boxes that he'd stacked on one of these hand carts. And he took one of these bungee cords that he was going to wrap around the boxes and hook it in. And we tried to hook it in, I guess he didn't really get on all the way, and the cord snapped back up and hit him right in the eye. Dan goes down, and he's lying on the floor, just writhing in pain. And we're just sort of all kind of stunned to see what happened, and someone's gonna, call 911 or whatever it is. And this one partner who's running the hearing comes walking down the hallway, and Dan is lying in the doorway of somebody's office. This partner looks down, sees him, steps over him to talk to the associate in the office. And we're all looking at this guy like, what do you think? Just couldn't believe it. And he looks at us just like, I stepped over him, what's the problem? We all have people in our lives at work who are unbelievably difficult to deal with, especially if that's your boss. But now when you realize you don't work for that guy, you work for Hashem. And in fact, in some respects, you get to work for yourself by using the opportunities to make yourself better and bring yourself closer to Hashem. Suddenly, all these different difficulties and challenges that we have at work, and this is true in our lives generally, these aren't just challenges. These are specific opportunities that Hashem is giving us in order to help us reach our purpose, to improve ourselves and make ourselves into better people and become closer to Hashem. But something else starts to happen as well. Because when you have this attitude, if you really can internalize it, you kind of don't get fazed by anything. Like the challenges and the difficulties, and when things come up, you're able to stay calm and relaxed and just look at it as, okay, here's another challenge. I have to think about how to deal with it. And when you're around somebody like that, it makes life way easier. Because all the things happen at work. Things come up. Things get messed up. There's problems. This client's unhappy. This thing got delayed. How are we going to deal with it? People make mistakes. But instead of getting worked up and upset, okay, new challenge. I need to figure out how to deal with it. I remember this one time, again, when I was a very junior lawyer, the head of my group was a guy named Harvey Miller, who was really the father of modern corporate bankruptcy practice. And he was basically the guy. Everyone knew who he was. He was the number to call if you were a company in financial distress. And a friend of mine was working on a massive deal with him that happened to had a very strong governmental aspect to it, in part because there was a potential Chinese investor. And it was very secretive, and everything needed to be kept under wraps. And this associate sent an email to a lot of different investors, and she was supposed to keep all the investors on BCC so nobody could see anybody else's name. And she didn't do that. And lo and behold, the next day, it's on the front page of the New York Times business section. And she was just, absolutely mortified. And she happened to notice it herself when she was looking at the paper. And she got into the office, and the first thing she did was she went over to Harvey's office to basically throw herself on her sword because she was the one who messed it up. And she went in there, and this made a huge impression on her. She went in there and said, Harvey, look, I messed this up. And Harvey stopped. Okay, well, let's at least make sure they spelled my name right, and then we'll figure out how to deal with it. And she was expecting to get yelled at or fired or who knows what. And his reaction to it was just, no, this is a challenge. It's something we have to deal with, and we'll figure it out. When you have that attitude, your career will become better. You'll find yourself becoming more successful. Because the fact is, everyone likes being around that person who's calm and relaxed and doesn't get worked up, especially over things that aren't such a big deal. But even the big things, if you can keep your head about you, and it's much easier to do when you recognize Hashem's running the show. He's pulling the strings. It's just our job to react to it. And the reaction that Hashem's looking for, the opportunity that He's giving us, is that we should be able to stay calm, recognize that He's running things, and just figure out the best way that we can proceed. So this attitude makes your career actually give you more ability to be successful because of the fact that you're going to keep yourself calm in every stressful situation. And then something else starts to happen. Whether we like it or not, as Jews in the workforce, whether you're obviously Jewish or not, whether you're wearing a yarmulke or not, we're ambassadors. We're Hashem's ambassadors. Hashem expects us to make an impression on the people around us in a good way. And that can be true when you're dealing with Jews who aren't quite as aware of the need to have a relationship with Hashem. It's interesting. The single most important event in the bankruptcy bar in the distressed investing community is the UJA lunch. No joke. Every year, 1,500, 1,800 people show up to this event. Working in the corporate bankruptcy world, everyone's Jewish. Firms I've worked at were closed on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur because it was just a huge part of the culture. So the opportunity to connect to other Jews was massive. And you can make an impression on them. Your behavior will make them realize that this is how a Jew behaves. And that can have just an incredible far-reaching impact. And you can connect to other Jews. I remember one time I was working on a deal, and it was one of the other lawyers involved. We were on the same side, both representing the same company. And I knew he was Jewish. I wasn't 100% sure. And he was kind of not such an easy guy to deal with. And we had a very, very long, complicated bankruptcy hearing, and the hearing was on Friday in Baltimore. And I happen to have a sister who lives in Baltimore, so I knew I'd be spending Shabbos with my sister. But the hearing's going on and getting later and later. And everyone knows, I'd even warned the judge that come 5 o'clock, I'm going to have to leave because I knew how long it would take me to get to my sister's house. And at one point we were worried that the hearing was going to continue to Monday, and my client did not want to wait. He wanted to get everything done, and how we're going to figure out. He's kind of looking at me, can you stay longer? And ultimately we managed to get the hearing wrapped up, and we got the judge's approval for what we wanted to do. And I'm basically wrapping up and throwing myself in my bag so I can leave. And as I'm walking to the door, this lawyer looks at me and says, Josh, you enjoy it. Have a good Shabbos. There was that connection with another Jew. Because of the fact that we were both Jewish, we just realized this connection. And because partially of my behavior. Calm. People look at how you are, and they use that as an example. And this way you can connect to other Jews. And these connections, by the way, can come up in times where you would never, ever expect it. A number of years ago, I was representing a company that had financed the construction of a prison in Chickasha, Oklahoma. If you've ever heard of Chickasha, Oklahoma, you're to be forgiven. Getting there is basically means like flying into, I think it was Oklahoma City, and then driving for like 3 hours. And before we went down there for a meeting, we were on a conference call with them. And during part of the call, one of the lawyers for the other side, who happened to be for the prison itself, who was sort of the borrower, they didn't use an outside law firm. It was the district attorney for Grady County in Oklahoma. And at one point, I don't know what made him say this, but things were getting a little bit heated. And he says, "We're not going to let you fancy New Yorkers with your fancy MBAs come down here and tell us what to do." Now, lo and behold, we had to go down there a week or so later, 2 weeks later, for a meeting. We traveled all the way down there. And I've always worn my yarmulke at work. I just never considered taking it off. Everyone should do what is comfortable for them. But for me, it was never really a question about not taking my yarmulke off. Except this one time. I thought, going in the middle of nowhere, I just felt a little bit uncomfortable. So I actually took my yarmulke off for this meeting. And we're sitting in this meeting. You've got the mayor of the town, you've got the warden, the district attorney, and the sheriff. Turns out the sheriff, I don't remember his last name, but he grew up and spent a number of years living on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. He was someone who had interacted with Jews all the time. And they're in the middle of Chickasha, Oklahoma. I had the opportunity to interact with somebody who knew what it meant to be Jewish. I never would have expected it. But when you view your work life and your life as all being the same thing, it's all about connecting to Hashem. It's all about using these opportunities that Hashem gives us in order to improve ourselves, both by connecting to Him and connecting with other Jews. Suddenly work is just completely different. There aren't two different sides to us. It's all the same. It's all about taking the opportunities that Hashem is giving us, using those opportunities to grow and to become a better person. And the reality is that's the path to simcha. That's the path to happiness. Because when you know that what your mission in life is, and you're actually getting closer to fulfilling it, there's just no greater simcha, no greater happiness than that. Because you can spend all of your time, you're not at work, you're fulfilling your life's mission. You're impacting other Jews. You're impacting yourself, you're impacting your family. You're having a relationship with Hashem. Suddenly the whole world is different. Everything about what you're doing in your life has a goal. And nothing about it is mundane. Nothing about it is just, I wish I didn't have to do this. They're all challenges and opportunities that Hashem is putting in front of us to help us reach our potential. Just to end with one last thought. Starting next week begins the month of Elul. Now, the month of Elul is typically associated with the high holy days, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. As you think about it as preparation for the days, Rosh Hashanah, the day of judgment, Yom Kippur, the day Hashem will forgive us. And so there's a certain element of it where we feel like we're approaching something that's important, which is obviously true. But the Baal HaTanya, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, says something really, really fascinating. The days of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, those are days where Hashem, we interact with Him like a king. But we're interacting with a king in his palace. When a king's in his palace in his royal garb, it gives a certain level of fear, because he's the king, and a certain level of awe. But when a king's out in the field, when he happens to be traveling, when he's out on vacation, he's more relaxed, it's more easygoing, easier to relate to. The month of Elul is the time when Hashem leaves the palace and comes out into the field where we are. It's the opportunity that Hashem gives us to relate to Him in a way that's more relaxed. I remember one time when I first started learning in this certain yeshiva, the head of the yeshiva, the Rosh Yeshiva, was a very regal person. And he just gave off a certain sense of almost royalty. He was tall, long beard, very well spoken. And so when I first started in this yeshiva, you have this relationship with him because you view him as he's the Rosh Yeshiva. And it was that first time I got the opportunity to spend a Shabbos meal with him in his house. You see him in a more relaxed environment. And it's easier to relate to him in that environment. Hashem does that for us during Elul. He comes down to us in a more relaxed environment and makes it easier for us to relate to Him. And so I just give us all a blessing that as we get closer towards the end of the summer, and we're going to start the month of Elul, to use that opportunity to recognize that everything that we do in our lives all has the same goal. We're all working for the same boss. We're all working for Hashem and trying to do our best to come close